A nurse's daily life in Mumbai takes an unexpected turn when a surprise present arrives from her estranged husband. Her younger roommate, Anu, faces frustration in her quest to secure a private spot in the city to be intimate with her partner. All We Imagine Is Light is directed by Payal Kapadia and stars Kani Kusruti, Divya Prabha, Chhaya, Kadam, and Hridhu Haroon. So, Matt, what'd you think of All We Imagine Is Light?
Well, I want to start out by saying that I'm really glad that we finally got a chance to see this movie. This film won the Grand Prix Award at the 2024 Cannes Festival. It's a film that really rests in the details, mainly centered on its dialogue, that builds such rich characters in this film. It really takes this very slow burn approach that's almost documentary like. For example, at the beginning of the film, we see these views of cityscapes, undertoned by this narration that is playing. You get the sense that we are watching real people, like as you would in a documentary. And so I think that's something that makes the film very unique in its own way. But it's elements such as these that make the film feel more reality than it is scripted and staged. This is certainly intentional. I know the director's previous work was actually a documentary film that got recognition in its own right. So I wonder if there's a connection there for her. But it really aids in the film's goal, which is, I think, building this contemporary portrait of these three women that live in India. But what I found to be almost magical about the film is the way that the characters so subtly and organically build out the film's themes through their own personal experiences. And by the end, I was left with a lot to ponder about the film and even celebrate. I wouldn't say overall it has this very profound effect, but it's profound in a very simplistic sense with these personal characters' journeys. And for that, I found it to be something very special.
It's a really beautiful film. I think it's a film that lives in this simple, wistful, philosophical warmth. That very rare feeling you have in films. I remember Nomadland feeling this way. I remember Her, a movie that we both really like, sort of feeling this way, but it's where inspiration and spiritual warmth and melancholy all seem to converge with one another. It's gentle and it's life affirming, but at the same time, it doesn't dispel any of the difficult choices that we have to make in our lives. Kind of like you were saying, it has this freeform or improvisational quality that you can certainly tell or see the origins of her documentary filmmaking in here, as you were talking about. It's funny, this is an interesting parody with another film from this year called Nickel Boys that we reviewed earlier. Mel Ross was a documentarian before that, and you could see, I watched his film recently, and you could see how the style of that film made its way into Nickel Boys, and I think you could say the same here. The themes and characterizations, I think, are dense, but they certainly prioritize tenderness above all else. For instance, we get a lot of interesting shots of just this vivid nightlife in Mumbai, and you can get the idea that Mumbai is maybe as entrapping as it is entrancing, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's scenes where it seems almost claustrophobic. At the same time, there is like a dense culture and just a real like majesty of living there. The way that the film is able to build all of that within the world is amazing. It's a film that just has a very unique feeling that just is very warm to watch.
Yeah, before I move on a little bit, I just want to mention something briefly about the film's themes because it plays a role later in the film, but I don't want to forget about it. But you were talking about city life in the film. There is this underlying theme about whether you live in the city or whether you live outside the city.
Yeah.
I love how the film really makes the city out to be a place that has like a lot of loneliness attached to it. And we noticed that change throughout the film. So I found that really interesting. And I want to dissect that further, but I just want to put it out there for now so we could circle back to it later because I don't want to forget. So don't let me forget. Before we go into all that, I do want to jump back to these characters because we're following basically three main women. We have Prabha. She's a hardworking nurse. She's wrestling with these very traditional values that she holds. She's married to this guy who's been in Germany. It's an arranged marriage, but he basically hasn't had contact with her. And the film makes a point to say it's been months or maybe a couple years. It's at this point where she's also being hit on by her boss, which is the doctor that works at the hospital.
Yeah.
I think she's grappling with this man that she's supposed to be married to that's not in her life, that she really has no connection with, and her future.
Yeah, I think she is maybe the most straight-laced of everybody here, maybe the most conservative in a way, but she has like such a wisdom and such a discipline that I find really inspiring as a character. She's a soulful person. She's looking for meaning in the world, but at the same time, she's trapped by a variety of social and societal constraints that you can't help but feel for her, even as she's somewhat severe sometimes, even as we get to know her better. There's this like very, very sad scene. We didn't talk about the rice cooker yet, but it was in the plot synopsis that I said at the beginning. But her husband, presumably, or maybe her husband, it's never really said, sends her a rice cooker. And the only reason we have a connection to the husband at all is because the rice cooker is made in Germany.
Yeah.
Now, this thing could have been delivered incorrectly. Like, the film never really gives us an answer, but it's a clear connection to this arranged marriage that she had and the distance that she feels with her husband. There's a really, really sad scene where she's kind of like almost hugging the rice cooker.
Yeah. She's on the floor too in the kitchen.
Yeah. So I just wanted to call that out. But she's a very, very interesting character.
Yeah, and a lot of her personality traits, how they come about or how they are shown to us, are in the differences between her and her roommate, Anu. One of them entirely is how Anu doesn't have money for the rent, and so she has to ask Prabha for money to pay her bills because she's kind of always going out and doing things. She's very free-spirited. She's seeing this man on the side. Even though her parents are starting to get her prepared for an arranged marriage, she's having this struggle of her future and what's prescribed to her from society and this man that she has kind of fallen for, and she's going out with lovely dates with on the side.
With Anu in particular, you can almost see her as a younger version of Prabha.
Yeah,
because she is at the precipice of this major decision that's frankly being made for her from her parents of an arranged marriage. This is so bizarre to us in the Western world, but I know that this happens all the time. Her parents are literally just like sending her pictures of like, how about this one? How about this one? How about this one? And it's bizarre to think about. But anyway, that idea and that life is being pre-prescribed to her. And you can see her trying to break free of it. And frankly, not wanting to end up in that lonely position that her roommate is in. One thing I like about the relationship here with Anu and her boyfriend is you get the feeling that this is truly forbidden love because this wouldn't be accepted on either side. So they have to find these secret places to meet up. There's a great scene early on where she's going to his apartment because his parents are going to be away. And you get the sense that she wouldn't be quite accepted either because she has to wear the hijab when she goes to visit him, and she ends up taking it off because she doesn't end up going. There's this kind of beautiful scene where she takes it off and looks really disappointed, like outside of the train. But we're only seeing one small part of Indian culture's societal constraints, whereas clearly there are others too.
No, definitely. And that is, I think, one of the big themes of the film is this dissecting and the critical analyzation of why they exist in the first place. I think this film is wrestling with those ideas. And lastly, to round up this group of three women, we have Prabha, who is being forced from her home by these builders because she doesn't have the documentation because her husband passed away. So she has decided that she is going to move back to her hometown village outside of the city. And this is where the film takes a big turn because we leave the city with all three women and they're going to help Prabha move to this village. At this point, we're seeing the film change in tone to something that I think a little bit more personal in nature, because when you leave the city, there's less amenities, there's less to do, there's less distraction. And so these women are left to really deal with their differences and also learn from each other. So it becomes like a beautiful tale of like sisterhood.
Yeah, and they're so different from one another. There's a great scene where they're passing like a bottle of liquor around. Two of the women are much more like ready to party than Prabha is. There's this great scene with Pravati and Prabha where they're standing outside what's going to become this complex that has unhomed her, basically, and they end up throwing rocks at the windows.
Yes,
and it's just this moment of like total jubilation and delinquency, but like sweet, sweet revenge. That's just beautiful. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
I know it's not a big detail, but I'm going to correct you slightly. It's actually the poster of the new facility.
Sorry.
So, but it's really funny because you see the rocks go through it and then there's a commotion because some people hear it and they're it's hilarious. So going from here, I want to talk a little bit about the ending, which is going to involve spoilers. So if you have not seen All We Imagine Is Light, I recommend watching the movie and then coming back to this review unless you don't mind being spoiled. But from here, I want to get a little deeper into the themes as well as the ending specifically about the movie. But I want to circle back to the themes I was discussing earlier about city life versus rural life. There are little reflections during their time in the city. One in particular is this narration that plays that's specifically says some people call this the city of dreams. I think it's the city of illusions. You have to believe in the illusion or else you'll go mad. So I think there's this inherent inauthenticity to maybe living in the city, or everybody has to be or act a certain way. There's an allusion to it, to its grandness, to its scale. As we go into this rural situation of the film, we suddenly have these characters that are butting up against each other in a more personal nature. Prabha and Anu, in the beginning of the film, the difference in financial situation, being able to pay the bills. One is obviously more responsible than the other. But I think as the film progresses, these barriers or these differences are broken down a little bit in a very positive way, that they have good influence on each other. I think Prabha is learning that she has to be a little bit free-spirited and not as tight as she is, and I think a little bit more open-minded to learning a new way of life. There's this particular moment in the film where she tells Anu that she can't escape her fate. It's interesting to me because this is the position that she's currently in, where she feels trapped in her fate, that she has no other options. What's so beautiful about the second half of the film that it really kind of turns that over on its head for her.
This is unfortunately not a fully fledged thought because I just started thinking about it like the past day or two, so I'm not sure I've made a conclusion about it, but I was thinking about the theme of impermanence in this film and the theme of fate and how those things don't seem to entirely go together, because I think with fate, you're on a one track and you know where you're going. This is what has always ultimately been your fate or your final destination, right? This film is certainly dealing with impermanence in a way that's like each passing moment, by the time you're mourning that moment, you're halfway through another moment type of philosophy. And I keep thinking about, the film is spiritual on some level, maybe on a level that's like more under the surface than it is overt, but the type of fate that they're dealing with in this film, is it something that's self-inflicted? Is it societal inflicted? To what degree is it spiritual? And I think that that's all here to various degrees. I just haven't fully fledged out to what that is, but that's certainly going on here. And I think a very interesting part of the film's conclusions. Something I like about the way the film ends, which maybe might be disappointing to some people, is that we don't really get the sense that any of these issues are now solved. So we were talking about rural life versus city life, and I think a much, much worse film would be like, oh, they moved to this village and everything is fine, and that's not what this film does. You get the sense more that this impermanence, going to this village, seeing their friend in a new environment, them experiencing a new environment, has somehow made them feel more at peace with themselves and somehow added to their introspection in a way that's going to help them deal with their issues. But the ultimate fate of those issues, the ultimate solution of those issues, is still out of grasp for us, the viewer.
Yeah, and I don't think the film is making a case whether the city is good or bad or whether rural life is good or bad. There are some issues with rural life that do come about, and that leads to one of the main climaxes of the film where this guy washes up on shore and Prabha comes in and resuscitates him back to life. They bring him to this, the hospital in the village, which is literally just like a house. It looks like a house, which is filled with stuff. Did you notice there's like boxes of stuff along the walls?
Oh,
It's It's very messy. It's just stuff everywhere. One of the little comments that I remember being made is that somebody that lives in the village, one of the women was like, oh, the doctor will be here in a bit. And it's just not sure when he's going to be around. It's obviously going to take like a day or something because he's not physically there all the time. So it's not like the film is coming down hard on what is the proper way to live your life, but more about like the philosophies of how you live your life. And it doesn't matter where you really live, but as long as you take those philosophies with you. And I think that's one of the main points of the film that it has to make. So, but going from there, we could talk more specifically about this man washing up, because when Prabha is taking care of him, he becomes conscious again. And they have a conversation that we're not quite sure how conscious he really is.
Yeah, this could also be a fantasy sequence. It's either he's confused and she's using his confusion to deal with her issues, her inner struggles, and have a conversation, this like fake conversation with her husband, or this is something that's imagined in her mind. But one way or another, there was a second in the film that you're like, is this her husband? But I think it's clearly not.
Yeah, and I think maybe that could play a little weird with audiences, perhaps, because
it played odd with me at first.
Yes, because
I got used to it.
Yeah, it almost seems like it has this mystical element.
I also think that I don't know how to explain this, and if I really have evidence for it, but there seems to be like a spirituality or a mysticism that's like just at the margins of this story somehow. Something about it feels mythic in a sense to me, that this scene, upon reflection, is not totally out of place.
Either way, it does the job because it gives Prabha this conversation I think she's been wanting to have with her husband, who has been MIA for the last year plus. She learns from this moment, I think, built in with these experiences. She doesn't have to continue living her life this way. This beautiful shot at the end of the film, which I absolutely love, them just sitting together. They invite the boyfriend because he snuck to the village.
Yep.
And the person that works at the little cantina.
He was like a kid. Yeah, he's like 14 or something.
Yeah, it's just dancing in the background of this entire shot. But it sits on this shot for a good, like through the credits are rolling.
Yeah, and I'm usually a cut to black guy. I'm usually like, I like a stark separation between the film and the film is now over. But I think this really worked for me. I was just really sitting in that feeling, especially when we were talking about the convergence of melancholy and these bittersweet feelings and these soulful feelings. I don't get that feeling in a lot in films anymore. So to be able to sit in that for just a little bit longer, I thought was very welcome.
They're all gaining something from this perspective. that they've gone through. And I think that's, it's powerful and joyous in a way. And I think that's displayed by the person dancing in the background for like 5 minutes as the credits roll.
You ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go to grades. I give the film an A-. I don't really have much to add, but I thought it was a lovely little portrait of these 3 women in India, like contemporary modern women, and just what they're dealing with in this particular time in society and culture.
I would agree that their struggles are specific in the ways that they find themselves in these, like arranged marriages is not something that we typically deal with in Western culture. But at the same time, the way that they feel, I think, is very universal, because I felt so much of what they were talking about, especially in these more like voiceover philosophical sections, that I felt very deeply. And I said, oh, that's something that I've dealt with or thought about in my life. I think they're universal in a nice way. I didn't give the film a grade. I should give the film an A-. I think it is lovely. There is like a very specific lightning in a bottle type of effect with this movie that I'm not totally sure how you could calculate. One thing that you said to me when we were walking out of the movie, and you said it as a compliment, was anyone can make a good movie. And it's true. There's not a lot here in terms of like big spectacle or, even like camera positions and things like that. There's just an intuitive sense of how to make something that's soul enriching, and that's really, really cool.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that, but the camera movement and the way everything's framed, it's all very raw. And it's very intimate. And it made me think anybody could make a movie if you have the right characters, the right story, the right purpose for a film.
If you know how to evoke emotion in a meaningful way.
There wasn't a lot of money put into it. There's this documentary style quality to it. It seems very run and gun. You obviously need to be talented to do something, so I don't want to take away from that. It just put in the perspective of like, if you have talent, you don't need a huge budget to do something. And I think this is great proof of that.
So that's it for a review of All We Imagine Is Light, which is now in theaters. So definitely check it out. Let us know your thoughts on the film below, and we will see you next time.